almost good evening, but my name is Mayor Ham. I want to thank all of you who are here tonight or this evening and going into the night for this discussion on parking. Just a couple announcements here, and I'll step away. At this point in time, we only have 2 council members here, but there are laws that apply to if we have more than 4 council members here. It has to be called a formal meeting. So at this point in time, I only see myself and Council Broadway here. We won't go into anything official. We won't call the roll. So at this time, I'm not declaring it a formal call meeting. If we get other council members in, I see we have a 3rd council member come in, Ms. Matthews. So we're still below the minimum 4. So,
Mayor, if I could say something, Charles Gaylor is still got the bug and fever and everything else, so that's why he's not here tonight. I imagine he got the message.
I had a conversation with Councilman Gaylor this morning, and he told me that he will not be here, that he's not feeling well. So we're still only 3 members here. We don't have to have a formal roll call at this point in time. I'm going to turn it over to our Downtown Development Department Manager, Director, Ms. Seiko.
Thank you. Speak through that off button. Thank you so much for being here this evening. For those of you in the back, if you don't mind sitting at the front, we do have some open seats up here if you want to kind of file in. If you have not signed in, we do have a sign-up sheet at the back. We have asked for your email address, which we'll just use to give you updates on parking. I promise not to spam your inbox. So again, thank you for being here this evening. The objective tonight is really just to hear input and feedback as it relates to downtown parking capacity and use. We hope that that input will guide any next steps that we have related to management of our parking as our needs continue to change. So I'd like to introduce our facilitator this evening, Mr. Dwight Bassett. He serves as the Director of Economic Development and Parking Management for the town of Chapel Hill, and I'm just going to read a little bio so I don't mess it up. Dwight has spent the last 35 years in urban and economic development. He has privately owned 3 coffee shops, 2 retail stores, a consulting business, and a woodworking studio while working in government. I'm sure there's a great story there that I would love to hear later. He has led most aspects of economic development from initial planning and visions to complex commercial and housing project financing. He was hired to work for the town of Chapel Hill in 2007 and has spent the last 15 years implementing the economic development strategy that was produced in 2008. He's also completed retail, office, and housing market analysis for benchmarking purposes. Dwight has led planning and engineering initiatives for downtown, special projects, internal development, affordable housing work, parking studies and management, all related to issues downtown. He has a wealth of knowledge in these areas and many more, and his experience is why we've asked him to facilitate this evening's forum. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to you.
Good evening. Good evening. So before we get started, a few housekeeping rules, just so, in fact, we all have passion. I know I'm passionate about some subject. And so we're going to set some basic ground rules that I'm going to make a presentation. We're going to come to a point where there are 3 options, and then I'll go back to each one of the options, present it again, and then we'll open up the floor for comment to record. If any of the comments are not related to any of those 3 options, then we're going to put them in a parking lot so that we'll record them for the notes today. So we're asking that you to be respectful of each other as we go through the options. If you want to comment several times on one option, I'm going to ask that we give everyone else a chance before we come back to you, just out of respect for the larger group. And so any questions about those basic operational rules, just so we can have a successful meeting? All right, then we'll get started.
We do have a question in the back.
Yes.
Good evening, sir. Charles Wright. I just have a quick question for you. How did you come about with the 3 options? Did that just come in your mind, or was it a group think, or how did the 3 options just come about? If you can explain that in brief, very briefly.
I'm actually going to go through that and get to that in the presentation, but to answer it in a short answer, it came out of your 2017 parking study. There were several options, and then looking at your occupancy in downtown. Just to give you context of who I am. So 1986 is when I got into downtown development, and I've evolved to be in economic development. I started managing parking in the year 2000. That gives you some context of the time period. So I took a look at that parking study, looked at the available spaces, and then came up with gradual steps of how you might begin to implement a parking system. Any other questions before we get started?
Can I ask a question of the audience? Can you all see okay, or do we need to dim the lights a little bit? Good? Okay. All right.
So for any of you who want to make comment outside of this forum, Aaron has created a scan code, and I'll put it back up on the screen at the end of the presentation. So if you want to take a picture of it and send comments in, it will take you to a place to submit comments after the meeting and later, just so that we make sure everyone gets a chance to give input. Again, I'm Dwight Bassett, Director of Economic Development and Parking Services for the town of Chapel Hill. So just to remind you of a little bit of the background for Goldsboro, a parking study was executed in 2017, started in 16 and finished up in 17 to determine current and future parking needs and capture availability. The study also captured parking during peak times and briefly covered future enforcement and management opportunities. So that's part of the baseline of what I read for the last few weeks to determine how you might think about moving forward with your parking needs. Growth, there has been recent growth in downtown, whether it's housing or new businesses coming in, which adds to that parking demand that needs to be thought about. We're going to talk briefly about types of parking and users and behavior, public, private, citizens, employees, residents, and visitors, and current concerns and opportunities for improvement, and then some potential management options. And that's where we'll take a break and let each one of you add your thoughts and comments about each of those. So the goal tonight is to consider options in creating a parking system that supports business and growth in downtown. Seems to be something that we could probably all agree that that's something that we want, no matter who you are or what your perspective is. We certainly don't want to have a negative impact on the economic vitality of downtown. We want to have a positive impact. So this chart, and I hope you can read it, on the left side it starts, this is my options chart, and it gives you the context of how you manage parking. On the left, it starts with free parking, and on the far right, it goes to paid parking everywhere. It graduates each step of the way, 30 minutes free, hour free, whatever else before the time limits are up or you charge for parking. But it sort of shows you sort of the gamut of the whole parking system and what it might look like from one end of the scale to the other. And that's kind of where we're going with the options. They're very broad and very different, but it felt like that was the best way to have a facilitated conversation, is to go across several options and then give you a chance to discuss those. So let's talk about types of parking on street. On-street parking is a critical resource for supporting retailers and other businesses. 99% of customers want to be able to see a parking place close to the store in order to visit you. And we want to help make sure that that's a reality to the best of our ability. It is usually the most convenient parking option for retail customers, as I just said, and restaurants. And the need to promote turnover is the key for on-street parking management. On-street parking is critical for customers of retail and other businesses in downtown that have a storefront. Second type is off-street. Off-street is also a critical resource for supporting retailers and other businesses, but it may be the business owner that are employees that are parking in those off-street lots, or it could be residents or office workers. And it's also critically important, just like on-street, but it's for a slightly different sector. Most retail customers who are coming downtown to shop or eat most likely aren't going to want to park in the off-street unless it's super convenient to the destination they're going to. So I looked around in North Carolina and tried to find a comparable city, and there aren't. You're unique in your size and scale and number of parking places, but I just put this one up for context because it was the closest relative, and it's not. Actually, it's like 10th cousin or something compared to Goldsboro because of their tourism trade. It brings a lot more customers. But the fact is, they still manage their parking. They charge on street, they charge off street. They're building a new parking deck right now. And so if you wanted to look at a comparable city, there are very few in North Carolina, your scale and size, that have gotten into parking management. That's a good thing though, because it means that you've got a thriving downtown that needs to manage your resources to make sure it continues to thrive. So downtown parking has to support economic.
Sir, excuse me just a second.
Okay.
We do have a quorum. So at this time, I'm going to ask our clerk to call the roll. Then we'll be in an official meeting, so call the roll.
Mayor Ham,
Here.
Councilman Broadway,
You.
Councilwoman Matthews,
Present.
Councilwoman Jones.
Present. Thank you.
That's okay. Downtown parking has to support the economic vitality of downtown. Only in the last few years that I had managed it just on behalf, parking on behalf of the manager's office, kind of as an oversight the entire time I've been in Chapel Hill. But several years ago, council decided that they wanted parking managed for the benefit of economic vitality. So they moved it into my department just to make sure that all policies and procedures support the well-being of our community, and it wasn't just for the benefit of parking. And so I get it. It's critically important to have a thriving downtown, and we want to make sure that we move in that direction. Parking has to be balanced between public and private interest, meaning whether it's public spaces or private spaces and how they're utilized. If you're own a private parking lot, then you have the right to use it however you want to. It's not managed unless you contract to have it managed. And so there has to be a gentle balance somewhere in there so that there's public resources available for the residents who want to come downtown to Goldsboro and shop. Parking has to be managed to balance the interest that I just mentioned. So here's the baseline of where we're going, is this 2017 parking study. And we're going to go through 3 slides that sort of gives you an overview. We can talk about the impact of each of those slides and what I read in that slide and see if it helps set the context for where we're going on the 3 options. So this one, first thing I want you to take note of is the fact that you've got 3,595 parking spaces in downtown. You have 1,249 public off-street, you have 680 on-street, and you've got 1,666 private off-street. So first off, it's the total parking count, critical for your scale and size of downtown. The second is looking at the occupancy, and this occupancy chart that you're seeing on the screen right now is during a peak period in downtown. So this is not from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. This is from a core period, I think it was 10 or 11 till 2 in the afternoon, the core middle of the day where restaurants have their peak period. And just to give you some scale and context, is when do you need to be concerned about the occupancy level of your parking? When should we be doing something different? And in the parking industry, at 60% occupancy, and that occupancy isn't, again, just peak period, it's throughout the day. In other words, you've got to have 3 or 4 peak periods where it's hitting these occupancy numbers that I'm fixing to talk about in order to be at that point. If you're at 60%, you need to be planning for additional resources. If you're at 70% occupancy, you need to be building additional resources. If you're at 80%, you need to change your management so that you can continue to accommodate the support of businesses in downtown. And so if you look at your occupancy, and there's an additional chart that shows you another peak period time where you do have some specific spaces that reach some of those key occupancies. But overall, this is just the global picture of downtown parking in Goldsboro. You're in okay shape right now, but you're probably at a point, based on the parking study and what I read it in and talking to Aaron, where you at least need to begin thinking about how we manage it to make sure that those resources continue to be available for retail, restaurant, and other businesses in downtown. So this is by total parking occupancy by time of day, and you can see the 8 to 10, 11 to 1, 2 to 4, 5 to 6, and 6 to 8. And you can see when we look across the day, we're still not hitting those 60, 70, or 80% occupied levels. So that says you're probably in good shape right now, but maybe you need to start thinking about management to prevent from getting to that point and being surprised one day where you wake up and you are 60 or 70% occupied in one particular area. So then we look at this slide, and then you see based on occupancy levels, that you do have some on-street spaces in a couple of lots in the core area of downtown who do reach 70% during the peak period, but it's only in a peak period. Again, you saw the measurement across the day from 8 to 6, and it's only those small sections. So that even more reinforces that you probably need to think about some management techniques to help make sure that that parking is turning over and supporting businesses in downtown for the good of existing and future businesses. So now I'm going to go through 3 scenarios, and so I'm going to scan each one, tell you about it, and then we're going to go to the following slides and talk about each one individually. That's when you'll have a chance to offer comments and thoughts of your opinion and thoughts about what's being recommended. So the first one is to manage on-street spaces. Put up signs, put a time limit, don't charge, but patrol and give tickets for people who violate the time period. So there is no charge. The only charge that would result is if they stay in a space, and you could set the time frame for 2 or 3 hours, and anyone that stayed beyond that point would be eligible for getting a ticket, lucky them. The second option is to manage on-street public parking. Manage for 2 and 3 hours. Set parking rates for those spaces from either a quarter to $1 per hour, whatever you might choose. You issue residential and business decals for use in off-street lots, but you're not necessarily managing off-street lots at that point. You're just showing anyone that's paying attention to that on-street parking, if you have that decal, that you're technically a business owner or a resident downtown and should be in a designated off-street. So you're still only technically managing the on-street, but you're charging for parking on that option, which is option 2. And then option 3 is managing both on-street and off-street and charging for both, which would mean you would need to have a management system in place to support that. So there would be time limits or monthly fees associated with both the on-street and the off-street. And then there would be someone who patrols those lots to make sure if you're abiding by those time periods. So we'll go back to each one. Option 1, again, putting up signage, putting a time limit on street, and patrolling for violators, but not charging actually for the parking. Comments and thoughts? It's your chance. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Dr. David Craig. So right now it appears that none of the numbers that we have downtown are above the 60% threshold, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so it makes me wonder why we're here. If you look at the amount of space that we have available downtown, we really don't have that much space available downtown in terms of building space. So why institute this now when really all of our buildings downtown are pretty much being utilized for the most part?
So during that the color-coded slide, you do have some on-street and lots close to the core of downtown that is peaking at 60 and 70%, but it's only in a core period of time. And you're asking for a professional recommendation, and that is that you need to start managing before it grows and gets worse, primarily because you don't want to lose customers. And if a business comes downtown, I don't particularly like going to Walmart, but occasionally I go to Walmart and I park way out of the furthest spot because I don't want anybody parking next to my truck and I don't want dings on me. And so I walk further than probably it is to park in most of your lots in downtown, but not every customer does that, so it's important.
Yes, sir. And you said you don't want to hinder business. But
Right.
what I'm saying is if the buildings are already mostly full and we're beyond the 60% threshold, we're not going to hinder business right now by not implementing these parking changes.
So if you go back to that color-coded map, and if I was a new customer coming downtown during that peak parking period, where it's at 60 or 70% occupancy during that peak period, you could begin hindering people additional customers that might come downtown if the parking isn't easy for them.
Can I add on to that too? There were a couple areas on that chart that were 80 and 90%.
Yep.
And that study was done in 2016, 2017. So since then, we've had 40 building renovations, and we've had more than 80 second-story residential units that have been added in concentrated areas. So there have been changes since then. So I imagine if we look at it now, the heat map will look a little bit different.
Yes, sir.
Charlie Gaylor. One of the things that has concerned me, I guess you'd say, about parking, well, first of all, I'm glad we've got a parking problem downtown Goldsboro. That's a good
Absolutely.
to a large extent. But one of the things that I think we have to keep in mind as we go forward on this, having large residential developments and having retail in the same area, the people that come in to park aren't there for the same purpose.
That's right.
And the people that are in the apartments, which we're so glad to have them, but those people are there maybe to stay overnight, or maybe to stay for the day, maybe. You don't know how long the car is going to be there. But vehicles are in these areas now. We have problems in certain areas of Goldsboro now where retailers are having a hard time being able to give customers a place to park.
Absolutely.
And so that's an issue that we've got to determine. Now, we may get a 60 or 70 percentile, I don't know. Doesn't really matter, but I think it's very important that the retailers have an option to be able to have people park where they can come in and shop.
And that's a key driver behind having this forum tonight. It's a key driver behind doing the parking study being done, is to make sure that you have a future supply as you support additional residences and additional businesses in downtown.
May I ask for clarification from the previous gentleman? I want to make sure I heard your question correct. Did you ask that all buildings or businesses are full, or parking spaces are full? Maybe I misunderstood.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, when we look at the degree to which we have available spaces in buildings, it appears to me, I don't know, I don't have the actual numbers, and this is perhaps why we need a new parking study to be done that's inclusive of that type of data. It appears that for the most part, most buildings are being utilized downtown. And if we don't have documentation that says we're at that 60% threshold, then yes, at times parking may be tight, but we may not need to do this right now. We may need to plan for an eventuality, but now may not be the time that we pull the trigger, basically.
Do we have data that would tell us what kind of occupancy we have in regards to the businesses or buildings that are downtown? Do we know that percentage?
Yeah, we do track that. It's really about, we've got a 30 to 35% vacancy rate.
So
So we do have quite a few buildings that are vacant, more than I would like to see anyway.
So if I'm understanding correctly, we have a 40% occupancy as far as inside the MSD or downtown, and currently we're at 40%. I think I saw that, 70% at peak hours. And so there's some availability here to start planning for maybe the future. Once we exceed beyond 40%, I'll say, of buildings downtown being occupied. I just want to kind of understand the numbers, sorry.
Yeah.
But those numbers are based on 2016-17, correct? So
The 30% occupancy of the parking spaces, yes. Not the occupancy of or the vacancy rate, that's current.
So we have no current numbers for what's going on right now currently, do we?
Not unless we conduct another study.
Right.
We know where we were then, and then we know what growth we've had. And we wouldn't be here if we haven't had a lot of conversation about parking strains currently. So that's what we are.
So if you decided you wanted to go forward to test that market, I would encourage you not to think about a full-blown parking study, but to hire a firm to simply do parking counts and do the heat maps, because you've got good data. The data's not bad in the 17 map. It's just to check the statistics to see if there's been change in those occupancies. You don't need all the other copy that came along with that parking report, so it would save you a lot of money to just do parking updated counts.
Can I say something?
Oh, go ahead.
My name is George Hodgson. I'll be 60 years old this year. I grew up downtown Goldsboro. And it was hopping, thriving, and shops open everywhere. A lot of things have changed. Streetscape looks great, but we lost 2/3 of the parking on Center Street. And I think that now we got the old Walt Heavy Bank building, they got 67 apartments in there. Well, they've got a parking lot to park in. they won't utilize that parking lot. And they're utilizing the street parking. And one way to fix that was, there's a lot of things you can do. But when you lose 2/3 of your parking and have to pay somebody to come in and say, yes, you got a parking block, hell, we all know that. I mean, that's no doubt in our mind. But the thing about that is that when you got people with Texas tax and so forth and so on, and just like you said a few minutes ago, I'll park at the back of Walmart, I do the same thing. But the thing about it is downtown, I can't even get to my building in half the time, but there's gotta be a way to fix that. And you had a very good idea, and this is what I thought about earlier, is that if you're a resident of downtown or a business owner, 25, 50 bucks a year to get a sticker to put on, then that way, if your vehicle needs to be moved, then you have a number instead of having to run NCIC and everything else to find out that you can't get a hold of them. If they have that, then they have an emergency number for them to be contacted. I've had to go up to the View down there a couple times because I've got a trailer trying to unload in and out of one of our buildings. Can't get a hold of nobody.
Right.
In other words, nobody will answer that going down there. But I know the resolution on that, because I dealt with that with some of the churches and stuff downtown, blocking my parking lots and everything else. It's called when the rotators come on, your stuff gets towed. And my thing about it is there's got to be a way that if you're a business owner or you're a resident downtown, that if an emergency comes up, to be able to get in contact with them by some type of identification besides the license tag number on the vehicle. Because that takes precious time. And that's going to be one of the best ways that we can start implementing this. And a long time ago, they had motorcycle cops and everything else that rode through and marked the tires. Every 2 hours, you got a ticket. But on Walnut Street, I mean, the merchants are trying their best to keep allowing their customers to come in their place, but the apartment people and everything else, they're blocking everything. And then you got the food thing that goes on with Harvest Church. They keep half the streets blocked on Mondays or whatever. And I think they're doing a great job for the community, but at times it puts us, at one time they were coming off of George Street, they blocked halfway down George Street. And you couldn't even get on Walnut Street or get to any of our businesses because they were going in there and getting food. You know, I think that's great, but there's got to be another plan on that. And we got to start with, if there's a vehicle parked somewhere that has got a sticker on it, at least you can get in touch with them. So if we need to get into our business or unload or whatever, then we should be able to. And I mean, most of our properties we have back parking anyway. So we have the parking supply, most of our properties, but we still need to be able to get to the front. And that's the biggest thing that we're having to deal with. I know that there was a study done, they paid a guy $80,000, $90,000 to say, yep, you got a parking problem. Well, that's one thing. When you take 2/3 of the parking out on Center Street, it creates a parking problem. And that's something's got to be looked at that, and you got to figure out a way that if there's an issue with it, to be able to get contact with the person. Hey, we got an emergency, need to move the vehicle. Other than that, when you call rotation record, that's a $150, $300 charge. And they don't want that either.
My name's Patrick Riley. Patrick, can I say something really quick? Sorry. There is a gray Toyota van. We have a parking problem. If you drive a gray Toyota van and you park behind someone, that person is trying to get out. You said Toyota, right?
Gray Toyota van.
Gray Toyota van.
I'm ready
Yeah,
to
okay.
that.
Yeah, do you mind moving your vehicle? Thank you. Okay, sorry.
No problem. And sir, I appreciate all your comments. I hear everything you're saying. I'm Patrick Riley. I'm managing partner of the View at Wayne National Project. And we couldn't have been more than happy to invest $13.5 million in downtown Goldsboro. So thank y'all for having us here. The thing is, we would love nothing more than to encourage our tenants to use the parking lot that we purchased from the city of Goldsboro. The reality is, without some type of public enforcement, the tenants are not going to do what you ask them nicely to do, no matter how many times we ask them.
It's human behavior.
If there's not some type of regulation that they're going to be expected to follow, they're not going to do it, no matter how many times we try to tell them to do it. So we're supportive of trying to come up with a long-term solution for the parking because we think it's a great problem to have. That's why we're at the meeting tonight. But from a landlord perspective, there is but only so much we can do to try to get tenants to do a behavior that's not being enforced by the city of Goldsboro. That's all I have to say.
$2.5 million.
Any other comments on option one?
Jill Poitras, my daughter and I own Beanies on Center Street, and we're probably in one of the busier sections of Center Street.
Yep.
So there's several things that we need to look at, and no one's raised this yet, is safety. We have a safety issue in our parking lots. We go to merchant meetings every single month, and they say, use these parking spots. Well, when you have high school kids or young ladies walking down Center Street, down Walnut, down the other way to get to a parking spot, buildings are empty, the lighting is not well. We're not, our parents, their parents, are saying, no, you can't park there. So that's one issue with safety. Even the parking lot that is across next door to the DGDC. My daughter and I were accosted there by a homeless person the other night. We couldn't get her into her car. He would not move for her to be able to back out of her car. We are doing what we can as business owners not to park in front of our business. A car is worth a lot of money.
Absolutely.
So employees we need to figure out another thing. We have restaurants, a lot of restaurants. It's not just the apartments. It's the people who are working downtown. We need to figure out a way that we can find a safe solution for all of us to park. And that, I think, would relieve a lot of the issues.
Okay, so did you put safety and security on that parking lot? Good. Other comments on option one before we move on to option two? And it's okay if you comment on any of the three options. I'm just trying to provide you some variety of thinking because you can scale these to be, you start with off-street permits and the signs and limit enforcement, or you could graduate enforcement, or 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, you could even charge for those on-street spaces, but there's some gentle balance in there. The reality is, parking management will help sales downtown if it's managed well, and I really think that's the goal that all of us would like to see, is to make sure that we're not hindering that business downtown.
I've got something to say.
Go ahead.
I think that it would be very hard for us to have had no parking regulations to go to like just the paid parking. I think we have to start with one of the beginning options and gradually get people into it. I think we would get a lot more bad feedback if we just said, okay, you got to pay for parking and that's it, and put all parking meters and stuff like that. I think you have to have a starting point that is not as painful.
And that's why the options are what they are. You're not paying for parking in the first option, but you're controlling it, you're designating it, you're putting up signs. And then once you do that, implement that, in a couple of years, you can still say, we've still got a residence problem, they're still parking on the street, they go move their car every 3 hours or whatever, and then you implement a decal program for off-street lots. So, you can pick and choose how you want to go forward, but for the good, you probably need to make at least some baby steps toward a full-blown parking management program to make sure you have capacity. Second one is managing on-street public parking, managing on-street for 2 or 3 hours, and ticketing. You can set the parking rate from 25 cents to $1 per hour, and you ticket for violators. Again, gradual step. Back to option one, on to option two. So I'll open option two up for comments.
I do have one more small comment. Ernie has a wonderful, huge parking lot. I've already asked that 10 times. If we could find a way that the city could find it in their budget, or the state, because they find a lot of stuff to go in their budgets, if we could find a way to possibly get it so that we could have it well lit and have that as a designated employee parking lot, that would be amazing, because it is very central. And to be able to put opening gates there with security cameras, I think that that's just an idea out there that maybe could work.
Other comments?
We've had lots of conversations about this parking lot.
Yes, sir.
One of the benefits to this is that if on-street parking is the most in demand,
right,
this would really turn that over. The capacity is there, but not for the street parking.
That's right.
And for the residents, like myself, I don't park in y'all's parking spaces. This would make it to where the parking would be too expensive for them not to park where they need to.
Right.
And this would also, unlike option one, which would have to involve some sort of enforcement from the police department, which doesn't have the budget for it, this would actually generate some revenue for that enforcement.
Right.
I want to say this one last time, that growing up downtown, we had JCPenney, Bell College, Sears, Montgomery Wharf. We had restaurants on Center Street, bottle shops, hat shops, bars, and everything else. And we never really had a parking issue until, like I said, 2/3 of Center Street lost their parking spots. And actually, originally, Center Street had 2 lanes down each way, plus they have parking on both sides. Now, they got 1 lane, you got parking diagonal, well, not diagonally, it's on the right-hand side as you're driving down each way, and then you got plenty of parking spots. There's a lot of wasted area there that can be reconsumed. And also, in the meantime of that, there's been a lot of buildings. Superintendent burnt down 2 buildings which made nice parking lots. And I think it's one of those right next to the DGDC. That was the last superintendent I saw burned to the ground. There's opportunity there, but the thing about it is that you still got to allow more parking downtown to allow that instead of utilizing parking that nobody does anymore. It's a lot easier for someone to pull in and back out of the place compared to parallel parking. And parallel parking can take anywhere from 2 to 3 vehicles just for the parallel parking part of it. So you're losing 2 or 3 parking spots per 1 vehicle. And that would help alleviate some of it, especially with it being on the right-hand side as you're driving down. It's in front of the businesses. A long time ago, most of the employees were either parking another lot or back behind the building or park on the other side, so they allow the customers to pull in front, they get out and then do their shopping experience. That's the way we've always seen it. Now on Walnut Street, stuff like that was parallel parking. You know, I don't know how many of y'all ever had to take the DMV test, but that's where you had to learn how to parallel park. It's on Walnut Street and South Street. But as far as Center Street, pulling in, that's something to think about looking at too. But to help figure out what's going on with this different situation, that when you see something going on with the number on it, then you'll know if there's a individual that owns a business or somebody that works for a business. That way, then you can get some more percentages on what's being utilized and how it's being utilized. But as far as implementing, we had a place in Raleigh on Fayetteville Street back in the 70s. You know, we had to rent a parking spot for our people that work for us so that they could keep Fayetteville Street open so that they could get in there. And the thing about it is, then it turns into a liability with a private parking lot, because if the vehicle gets damaged, well, I'm paying the parking. So there's a lot of liability that you got to be careful about a lot of that. If it's private property, it's private property. And I've had to deal with that where I'm at, because whenever having church downtown, and man, I went there one Sunday, I got blocked in 7 times on my own parking lot. To get, I had an issue with the city on parking vehicles on my parking lot. So we need to figure out how to make more parking spots on Center Street that help alleviate some of this before we implement a lot of this other stuff, because there's a lot of parking spots that can be made with what's there. And that's the way it was a long time ago. And I'm telling you, downtown a long time ago, there was thousands of people coming in. And they did not really have this big issue as far as parking back then. They did have some, but not like we're having now. And we got a lot less parking, but we got more businesses trying to come in. We got to figure out what to do.
So in option 2, we're talking about charging on street and doing decals off street. Additional comments on that option?
Thanks, great idea. Yeah, I've got a question on that one.
Yes.
And I'll stand if you guys want me to. My name is Matthew Sellers. I'm the new owner of Second Amendment on Main. Just bought it in December. So in this short time frame, I've seen a huge issue in the 100 block of South Center Street. A lot of vehicles come and they don't leave. It's probably the tenants that are above. I really don't know for sure to say that definitively. I like the idea of managing Center Street in particular, because that's the biggest problem that we all have right now. I'm a patron too. I go downtown and eat quite a bit. But my question is, how are y'all handling it? You know, I mean, law enforcement is stretched very thin. And I know we are, and I'm sure the city is. I don't know if anybody from Goldsboro PD is in here or not to talk on that, but do y'all outsource that enforcement? Or is that something that law enforcement is expected to do?
No, we have, the parking system in Chapel Hill is what we call an enterprise fund, meaning it's not funded by the general fund. So I have to make sure that my revenue covers my expenses, and I have 3 full-time enforcement officers that patrol not only downtown, but the neighborhoods adjacent to downtown. So they're just enforcement officers, not police.
They have 4 officers that work there, Pam.
My situation is a little different. I'm beside City Hall, and there's a parking lot beside my business. However, City Hall employees fill that parking lot up. So there's 14 of us employed at my business, and street parking is really our only option. So I don't know how my patrons stay. I'd say on an average 3 or 4 hours, because they might get their hair done and then they might get a massage. So they're there for long periods of time sometimes, or they're there for 30 minutes. But like street parking is our only option where I'm at.
Again, you might have to, Michael, look at your parking and figure out if there's sufficient off-street lots for employees and residences and businesses. And maybe that's part of your management strategy, is to look at use block by block and figure out if there's a way to manage it better versus just managing the whole district.
Yeah. And then I want to piggyback off of Jill, like a man approached me and my little daughter 3 times this week and was very aggressive. And to me, that needs to be dealt with more than parking right now. And then I call and they'll come, but they come back. So 14 women walking long distance to their car, that is a big concern.
Absolutely. So we've heard security a couple of times tonight. It's on the parking lot, and will be on our total list of comments tonight, but just not associated with one of the 3 options.
So I'm going to echo that too, what Jill said. I think safety should be your first priority before anything. I'll let you know that I am a business owner who encourages all of her employees to park as close to the shop as you can, and here's the reason why. If you saw what I'm seeing on the cameras at night, you would be encouraging all your employees to park as close to the store as they can. My employees have been solicited for sex. They have been threatened with knives. We even had someone come in and threaten to hold up our shop, and it took the police 15 minutes to get there. Again, I have cameras everywhere, and I'm telling you, if you saw what I'm seeing all throughout the night on the cameras, you would do what I'm doing, and you would encourage your staff, because we don't leave till 8, 9, and 10 o'clock at night. And it is not safe. My cameras go off all night long with drug activity. And I'm telling you, I think safety should be your first priority before you can start on the parking.
Okay.
I want to piggyback on that. I work for the county, and I'm very much concerned that county employees don't even have a place to park in most areas. They've got a whole lot of handicap plates, stickers up that people can't park, and those parking spaces are large enough sometimes to put 2 cars in. So I'm with this lady, I don't know who she is, but I also leave work late at night, and I too have been approached. And it's very frightening, because I should be able to park right in front of my building so that you can see me coming and going, but in most of the places where we park, you can't see where we're parked. So nobody is there. If I'm leaving out at 8, I'm just coming from the office right now, and it's pitch dark outside.
Yep.
Generally, I'm approached by somebody who's either asking me for money, soliciting me for sex, or saying crazy things that I don't want to have to deal with. So we have more important issues going on in this county right now, and in this city, opposed to trying to charge people to park downtown.
I think metered parking would fund some security. And I don't think that we should like bring it on easy, because then we'll spend more money replacing signage and doing it all over again. I don't think people are not going to park downtown because it costs $1. I think they'll just be upset about it, they'll still do it.
Or less, you could charge 50 cents an hour.
I mean, I think that would
You
fund
can get the
some
first 30
security.
minutes free. You know, we're talking about the, you know, second slide, I showed you the parameters of what you can do. But the point is managing parking for the good of economic vitality. So I'm gonna go back to option 2 and move on to option 3. And I'm gonna ask you to try and keep your comments to the options, and then we'll open it up at the end for broader comments. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
So I was wondering, you know, I hear a lot of ideas that protect the merchants and their employees and their customers. But I want to also make sure that we are protecting and caring about the safety of the residents as well, because all of us usually get to pull into our driveway or our garages. We have that access directly to our house.
Right.
They decided to choose downtown to live, understanding that traffic and all that stuff can be an issue, but I'm hoping these options are prioritizing our residents as much as it is prioritizing our business owners and the shoppers that come downtown, because they are just as important.
It's for the good of economic vitality, and I've named every one of those, and so I haven't called out any of them as the highest ranking, because they are critically important in order to make downtown thrive.
Yes, sir. So if you have well-lit paid parking or designated parking lots, you can actually have shuttles. You have shuttles that actually transport people, you know, to and from, if they have to park away from where they live or where they work. But that's an option.
Absolutely. Other comments on option 2, paid parking on street, decals off street? We'll move on to option 3, and when we go back through all options, I'm going to ask you if you favor any of the options, and then we're going to ask a general question at the end to get the temperature of where your interest is as far as overall parking management. So in option 3, you're charging for on-street, you're patrolling it, you're charging for off-street with decals, and you're patrolling it also. So this is the far right of that original chart that I showed you, where you've got a full-blown parking management system operating for the good of economic vitality. And again, there are a tremendous amount of levers no matter which direction you go, whether it's length of time before you patrol and ticket, or costs of parking. You know, you're talking about an issue that you're trying to get a handle on, so you can sort of set the gamut of what all of those indicators are that would help you get there. And you don't have to think that we've got to go to the far end. We can start at the lighter end and not charge, or we can go all the way to the deep end. Or we can go back to the first one and say, well, we like patrolling on street, but we still think we ought to do the decals. And so as we go back and look back through the options, and then we ask about parking management in general, just remember there's options in every one of those. There's levers that you can affect to make sure we're not having a negative impact on any market downtown. Again, 3 is about patrolling on-street and off-street and charging for both on-street and off-street and ticketing for those violations.
So we put decals on residents and business owners and property owners. What good does that do if there's still parking in front of our businesses that we can't do business in because none of our customers can bring their revenue in our businesses?
You'd have to patrol them. You'd have to have some level of enforcement, at least ticket people when they were parked on street and have an off-street permit.
On the stickers.
Still gotta have enough spaces for the cars.
Yeah, so where are they gonna park?
We have space on
Off the streets, and then it's gonna take up parking of the other people who have businesses. Example, theirs.
Well, you have a good bit of public resources, so you know don't know your square feet downtown. I haven't run any calculations on probably projected employment downtown, so it's kind of hard to address that without knowing those detailed questions. But just looking at your parking count, it seems like you've got a pretty decent supply of parking, so you should be able to figure out how to manage somewhere where everybody can benefit and keep the economic vitality as a priority.
Did the study from 2017 have any data that would show if we went with something like option 3, how much revenue could be generated? I mean, do we know if it's a viable option to be able to generate enough revenue to have enforcement officers and have a budget generated by the paid parking to be able to do the things to enforce it?
It did not. It simply gave very similar gradual steps, just like I'm doing today in this facilitated conversation. It's not hard. I'm glad to give Aaron the formula to do any of those calculations. It's just X times Y times Z, whatever else. You got to multiply days of the year, time, days of the week, time to rate, and time to occupancy you're projecting, but it's not hard. And so it would be pretty easy, but you still are making some pretty broad assumptions. And that's why after talking to your community and reading that parking study, my preferred option is that option 1 where you graduate into it, so that you can figure out what was right and what was wrong. And then, you know, maybe you do an annual parking for them if you take that step. And everybody comes by and we reflect on what did that do for us? Did we see more business downtown? Or we see more residents downtown? Or we see more investment downtown? And you make a determination if we need to go one more step.
I think it's gonna take step 1 to start with, but there's got to be a consequence from a resident to be parked on the street 24 hours a day. A county employee being parked. We have a county employee that's parked on the street because she's got a county car, and then she's a resident and she's got her personal car is parked on the street, and she's parked there all the time, and she's in her office across the street, not in her parking space. So we've got to start somewhere. We've got to make a gradual move. Apparently, it is a problem because everybody's talking about it, and I don't think we can just be like a turtle and hide. And you know, I think we've got to make some steps forward. It might be later as we continue to grow. I think there's planning to be more development downtown. I think we've just got to start somewhere. And there's 3 groups. There's residents, there's county employees, there's business employees. And then we would love to have a few customers so we can make a living.
Absolutely.
And so,
Most
you know,
important.
I don't think we can lose sight of our real goals.
Absolutely. There was someone else back
Yeah,
there?
yes, sir. This is, I hear these, well, at least what you put forth thus far. But let us not, please, start things here and don't have the policies to actually move the city into parking in the right direction. What I'm saying, let me say this directly. We do not need to have a money grab only for the money to be used for other things, as what happened with our water and sewer. Okay? That was a situation we got moved into. It was acted upon, rates were passed, and now we don't need all that money.
I'm sure City Manager Simon could certainly come up with a way to be accountable, whether it's an enterprise fund or whatever else, to show that revenue comes in, and this is how it's expended to support the program if you decided to go that direction.
One way to do it would be whatever the paid parking was, stay in the parking bubble, and that's paid for your enforcement and stuff like that.
So the good thing, you know, successful parking districts in Chapel Hill is almost there, but we didn't manage parking. In the first 10 years, we didn't manage parking. It was just kind of like a service we provided, and the council kind of got frustrated, so we wanted to manage it to go to economic vitality. There are parking districts in the United States that generate enough fund for capital improvement for downtown or that parking district on an ongoing basis. That's way down the road when you've got a complete parking management program, but it's also something to think about.
Yes, based upon your observation or your assessment, would you think that by employing a management strategy, it would address our issues before going on anywhere else? So it sounds like we've not taken that approach.
So I can tell you that, you know, in my personal opinion, my professional personal opinion, Chapel Hill is the most micromanaged parking system of a county size in the United States. I run it, so I can say that. And businesses still stay unhappy with me. But I also try really hard, and they know this, to accommodate and balance the interest, because if I'm not turning parking places, they're not having customers, and they do get that. There are some people who still think Chapel Hill should go back to free parking. Well, with 30,000 students across the street, that's just not real, because 30,000 students would come and take up all the parking, and no business could do anything. And so I think that when you look across people who manage parking, you will find that conditions improve. And again, you've got so many levers across that gamut that you can look at, deciding where you want to start and how far you want to go in that beginning step. But I guarantee you, if you do it, you'll come back in a year and hopefully you'll see some improvement in those on-street conditions, or the residents and office and government workers not parking on street, so that the customers can come downtown.
my last question. So does this mean that you've already made a decision to go on with this project without the concerns of the people that are present here today?
I don't have the authority to make that decision. I am simply presenting options. We're going to go back and talk about each one options with a vote, and then we're going to talk about general parking management as an option, just to see where everyone kind of falls on the scale so that we understand that. This is strictly a city decision. It's not Dwight's decision. Dwight doesn't have, I don't have that kind of authority. Other questions about 3? Okay, we're going to go back. And what I want you to do is I'm going to remind you what the option is, and then I'll give you a chance to raise your hand if you think you could support that option. I'm going to ask us to tally these votes, and then I'm going to give you one final option that's not specifically affiliated with any of the 3, just to test the overall interest from the larger crowd. So if you don't feel you can support one of the 3, then you can always just wait to the end and see what that question is and see if it meets your interest. First one is putting up signs and ticketing for people who violate more than a 2 or 3 hour limit. And that's as far as we go. Everybody in favor of some step along those lines, raise your hand. And keep them up where we can count. Okay. Number 2, making on-street parking for 2 or 3 hours, setting parking rates and charging 25 cents to $1 per hour and enforcing that. Any that are in favor of number 2?
Can we move the residential decals into number 1?
Yeah.
Yes, you can.
Because if you don't, then we're gonna have to move our cars every 2 to 3 hours.
That's right.
So, no, it kind of makes sense.
That's the levels I'm talking about. You've got flexibility. If you take a baby step, did you get the count of the second one?
I didn't, but I have a question. What does the residential decal allow you to do? I mean, does it
Park in an
decal-
on-street lot only. Off-street lot only.
Off-street, okay, that's, I just need clarification.
But that would have to be enforced too.
Yes,
Right.
but if you're enforcing, even in option 1, just for violators, but not charging for parking. So, you know, at some point, you're going to be enforcing some level or not.
But it would have to also be for businesses also, but there we run into the safety issue that you just heard Beverly talk about with Cry Freedom. Their parking is close to all the stores. Well, that's the most congested part of Center Street there is. So where's the parking for the customers?
Well, I think that's a task that you would need to take on as part of moving forward with the parking management system, is trying to figure out how many employees are in each block and if there's are sufficient off-street within a reasonable walking distance to make that work. So I think that's probably at least some base data you would need in order to figure that out. So again, everyone that's in favor of option 2?
There were more than that, so.
If you can combine 1 and 2, I'll go with 1.
1 with some options of 2.
Right.
Okay, I think I got that.
All right, and option 3 is on-street pay, off-street pay, and patrolling and ticketing. All in favor of 3? Okay, and my last question is, if you're in favor of parking changes and improvements that lead to a management system in general with no conditions set, please raise your hand and give us a chance to count.
Can you repeat that one more time?
Yes. I'm interested in some level of parking management that will improve the situations with no conditions attached. In other words, I'm not saying on-street, off-street, I'm just saying
Parking management in general.
in general.
Parking management in general, okay. Oh, good gracious.
Just as a count.
You only get one vote.
I may have missed it, but it's probably 40, 42. I'm gonna put 42 in there.
And so I'm glad to open it up for other questions or discussions that you'd like to have. And I'm going to leave this up on the screen, so if anybody wants to take a picture of that QR code so that you can send your written comments in beyond being at the meeting today. But I'm glad to answer any general questions related to parking.
I just have, so I can to be clear. So when you
Okay.
say off-road parking, so if I live on Center Street, I live up top,
Yep.
and I can't park in front of my building, I would have to park on a street on the side or on another side?
Probably an off-street parking lot if you were managing residential and business owners with decals.
Maybe said another way, it's parking lot versus on the street.
Yes, on-street versus off-street. So the decals would be off-street, the on-street would be strictly for business customers coming to dine and shop.
Can I ask you to go back to the slide with the number of parking spaces and what the breakdown is, off-street versus on-street? I think that's,
Again, on-street, you've got 680, and just for comparison, I know we're two different scales, and so I'm not saying you should compare yourself to me. I have 200 on-street parking places in South Dakota. You have 680. Public off-street, you have 1,249, and that's approximately the same number we currently have. But the unfortunate skew about that is I'm building an 1,100 space parking deck, so I'm going to jump ahead of you because of that new deck that I'm building right now. You have private off-street at about 1,600. And the other thing that is important from a public perspective is in order for the good of public policy to affect the common good of downtown, public resources needs to be at or relatively close to 50% of the total parking, and you're not tremendously off in that number. Chapel Hill, I control 30% of the total parking in downtown. I have 29 acres of private parking I'm trying to get rid of right now because it's limiting future development and growth. And so my policies don't always benefit the common good because it only affects about 35% of the total.
Sir, I have a question in support of what Councilwoman Matthews said. Could the regulations be during specific times?
Absolutely.
So that way, like for instance, if she's getting off of work, she would feel more safe because coming home and being able to park closer at her apartment, could it be that we put certain time hours
Absolutely.
in place?
My on street is patrolled 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. My off street is patrolled 8 p.m. So you can flip those hours however you want to, whatever your core needs are, that you feel meet the management needs of your community.
Idea. When traveling in the upper Midwest, in tourist cities, there will be a couple of large churches close to downtown with parking lots that are not used during business hours. They have a chain thing that they put up and say, funeral today, please don't park here. The other time they say, we're supporting our city, take a parking space, put $5 in this box, and the money is going to go to feed the people who are wandering around downtown or support the watch bus kind of thing or whatever. I don't know if it'll work in Goldsboro, but it's something that we ought to explore.
Absolutely. One thing I will tell you that most zoning codes dictate where public resources can be, and so you probably need to check with your planning and zoning director to make sure that it's allowed to be done like that. Like in Chapel Hill, if you're not zoned commercial, you can't have public resources. But it's certainly worth exploring. In fact, I have a number of lots that I lease from private landholders because I've been trying to bump my number up, the total percentage of managed parking, and we share in the revenue so that they don't actually have to manage it. I manage it, but they share in the resource income that comes from having it designated as a use type. Other general comments and questions?
My question is 600, however many parking spaces you say you have downtown, 600 and some. What area are we talking about? Because if you're talking about parking spaces around the police department or over on the other end, off James Street and everything, that's still not helping with the safety issue, and you're talking about parking apart from the businesses. including that in your available count of available parking spaces downtown?
It's a general parking count, so I don't know that it gets any deeper than that. So if you decide you want to go forward with parking management, you might need to do a little bit deeper analysis. Downtown Chapel Hill may not seem that big for those of you who've been there, but we manage it in 3 districts. I call it A, D, and C. The one that's closest to campus has been running close to 80% occupancy, and that's where I'm building a 1,100 space parking deck for probably 4 years now, which means I've got a problem because I haven't been managing, but I just took over parking a few years ago, so I'm taking action. Middle district ranges, according to time of day, anywhere from mid-60s to mid-70s. So I need to be planning for future parking, but I don't have a critical issue right now. The deep west end of downtown only has about a 60-some-odd% overall occupancy rate, and so I'm good. So you may have to look at breaking your downtown up. You can simply do a new parking count and have them put it on a map for you. Then you can analyze sub-block areas to figure out if there are resources for employees and residents by those sub-block areas.
And in that matter, when we're talking about those spaces, then that's where that idea of using a shuttle would be helpful, because.
Yep.
And to answer your question, most of the public off-street parking is like right in the middle of the central business district. You've got more on-street parking as you get towards William, and then go not as far as George, but James, or I got this reversed, but most of your public off-street parking is going to be kind of central. And the total count for public parking is, I can't do math, but 1,900 some odd, close to 2,000 spaces. And then overall we have 3,595, but that includes the private parking lot.
Right. Yes, sir.
One of the issues that I don't like for one is that we are in essence committing some kind of enforcement without any additional revenue. And so those are tax dollars that are just going to have to come from the general fund. And if this is a downtown problem and it's the problem of people driving and doing so, that's who I think should pay for it.
That's unfortunately true. If you're not charging for parking in any form, on street or off street, our tickets are a nominal amount of our income, and so it would be the same for you. So they're just going to subsidize whoever's doing the enforcement. They're not going to fund them. Other comments or questions in general?
If you give me the option and you share with me the data, if the Downtown Goldsboro Development Corporation gives me the data, the City of Goldsboro gives me the data, I can give you an alternative, I believe, viable option that the community will support. Dr. David Craig, I'll be in contact with the City of Goldsboro and the Downtown Goldsboro Development Corporation.
What is your alternative?
Right now, what I'm thinking about is working with the people that already own. I mean, I gotta work this out now, but the people that already own spaces to provide some off-road parking, but also the prospect of maybe building some parking, some deck parking. But in terms of safety, we will actually probably have to shuttle people, you know, I mean, you say safety is an issue, you're going to have to pay one way or the other. With police officers, increased lighting, or you're going to have to shuttle people. But those are my thoughts right now. But if you give me the data, I can work out something that I feel like would be a viable alternative.
Can I offer a couple of numbers that I think might help?
Yep.
So what we know at North Carolina Commerce is that the value of a parking space in our downtown is between $17,000 and $30,000 annually for our downtown businesses. That is significant. Now, if we're talking about building a parking garage, but we know what we see here is that we have capacity. But if we look at building a parking garage, the average price of each space is $25,000 to $30,000.
At least.
That's per space. So if you do the math, that's a very expensive parking garage. I'm not arguing against what you're saying. I just want people to think about that when they talk about building a parking garage.
Well, I'm at the beginnings of my thinking, but the City of Goldsboro owns a good part of Center Street down to the south end, am I correct? And it's not being utilized right now.
So there are plans for it.
Well, like I say, Give me the data, work with me, I'll work with you. I believe I come up with a better plan.
Any other comments or questions before we close out?
I do have one more. So it sounds to me like safety is hand in hand with the parking issue. And I have a very, very pregnant girl that works for me at Second Amendment, and she's had a really drunk guy go in there and throw a wallet at her. Threw a wallet at her recently. So I understand the safety side of it too. Has any conversation been had with the city in terms of how we can address that issue? I mean,
Money.
I don't even know if it's a money issue because I believe the money's there. It's
Are you speaking to panhandling?
Every bit of it. I know there's an ordinance for aggressive panhandling. I spent 7 years at Goldsboro PD, and I wrote plenty of those $1 parking tickets. So those need to go up to justify, doing it. But
I agree with you.
I believe that safety is a huge issue too. Like I said, I'm a patron just as much as I am a small business owner and a deputy sheriff county employee. But just want to know if the conversation's been had with the city, because when I got started, we were fully staffed, and law enforcement's having a hard time right now. So
we will have that conversation with Chief West, and he knows about it. We've had it amongst the DGDC members. We understand it's an issue. It's going to take some time to work on. But the beauty of this is to hear not just the parking issues, but this is democracy. It works. Sometimes it's messy, but we hear what you're saying, and we know there's concerns. And so we'll bring it back to the police department, see what we can do. But I just wanted to say thank you for Dwayne, and I think we all give him a round of applause for being here. Thank you guys for being here tonight. I'm not trying to prematurely end it, but we got to try to stay on time.
Yes.
Is there a place to get statistics on crime inside parking garages versus crime walking down the street? Having a parking garage, I think.
Before everyone leaves, I'm sorry, if you could make sure that you have signed in at the back, and also if you wanted to provide feedback, but maybe were timid or you didn't get a chance to speak, you can scan this code and you can send your feedback digitally, and we'll compile it with the comments that we got tonight for Dwight.
I do have one other question.
You do? Yeah, I'll ask you.
Is there any data or statistics that show if you start charging, does that, I know you can say it creates spaces, but does it actually create revenue? Like, does it drive customers away? Does it cause other customers to come in? Is there any?
So there's an unfortunate reality in it's called adjustment to management, and we're going to have an initial way because we've been charging for a really long time and still have people that remember 30 years ago they came downtown, drove around 3 times and won't come back. I mean, so there is a negative reaction to it, but generally managed parking does increase income because it encourages turnover, and that's the only way you get business sales is if you've got turnover. And if you've got problem areas where you're not getting the turnover, then I can guarantee you you're affecting your income for some businesses.
Hold the conversation down, please.
Do we have any other questions or comments? Okay. Oh, yes.
Okay, well, a lot of additional food for thought has been provided. I don't know what kind of management happened during the Christmas parade, but we need to be on it just like that day. Nobody for parking in parking spaces. I mean, in the tow truck, I mean, there was a little extra with it. The point was made and the streets were clear. Also, I think, you're gonna have to pay, that center aisle, I think is important on Center Street. And if we had that time from 10 to 8 or something, and then after 10, move your cars or whatever, because I understand people live downtown, and they should be able to park, they live there. Then, for example, if we go ahead and charge for that, I just think of it as, where is it legal? Topsail Beach and Wrightsville Beach. It was, all the parking was free. They threw up the park mobile signs. There was nobody not coming to the beach last year, and they just did what they had to do. Now, I don't know what kind of ruffles they went through and tussling with that, but you just don't have to be in. Everything is changed, so, I don't know.
Just one comment.
I'm not opposed to charging, but what I would like to see is a comprehensive plan, knowing where the revenue will be, how it will be spent. Because a lot of times we forget that little piece of it. So we need to make sure that if we come up with a plan, and we're all going to charge the citizens of Goldsboro, that we have a comprehensive plan of where the revenue will go and how it will be spent.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.